The first few weeks, it's hard to sleep because you hear things and you worry and you go into the bunker and no one's there. We were inside a base that was relatively safe. It's still very scary because you know it's a war. There's a lot of things that can happen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of the video podcast series. Our guest for today is my uncle-in-law, Dr. Aldrin Adamos. He is a military dentist practicing in California's Bay Area. He has been working in private practice as a business owner while also being an Army reservist for over 20 years. In this video, he shares with us his experiences being deployed with the Army, and he also gives us insight into how he was able to maintain a successful dental practice. Now onto the video. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I have Dr. Aldrin Adamos. He is a dentist. He's been a dentist in the Army, and he's joining me today to tell us a little bit about his experiences. So now I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I know that you were born in the Philippines, grew up a little bit in the Philippines, then came to the States, grew up in the Bay Area, went to UCSF, but that's about all I know.
Well, for disclosure's purposes, Erica happens to be married to my nephew, Joseph,
Yes.
or my cousin, Joseph. So welcome, Erica. And she was kind enough to ask me to join her on a podcast. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Milpitas, California. I attended San Jose State University and had a major in immunology and microbiology. And as she said earlier, I attended dental school at the University of California, San Francisco. And upon graduation, I commissioned into the U.S. Army Reserves and have been in the reserves since. So this is coming up on my 23rd year. I am in private practice in Pleasanton, California, as well as Stockton, California, both of which are in Northern California. So haven't really left the California Bay Area, at least in private setting, but I was fortunate enough to practice dentistry pretty much where the Army has taken me, and that's quite a few places.
You did say that upon graduation, you commissioned into the Army. So there are some scholarships such as the HPSP scholarship. So you didn't do the HPSP scholarship. You went into the Army in a different route, correct?
Correct. Yes, there's different paths to commission into the dental corps in the Army. One of the most common ones is the HPSP program, which you have alluded to. And that's more the traditional route where somebody will find a dental school that they're interested in and they apply for this scholarship, and the Army will in turn put you through school, and in return you'll serve some active duty time afterwards. I didn't do that. I did basically I was commissioned right after graduating from dental school. And then they went ahead and it was similar to that program, as I believe is Health Professions Loan Repayment Program. I think it was the name of it back then. Whereas I could have gone in prior to that and be a commissioned officer while I'm going to dental school, which I think is a really good deal. But I didn't know if that was the path for me, so I waited until I graduated. And originally, I was interested in the Navy because my family was all in the Navy, and that's all I knew about. I was also in the Naval ROTC program when I was in high school. So I had a little bit of understanding of that branch. But unfortunately, during my graduation time, a lot of the naval facilities in the Bay Area were closing down. So I didn't feel like I wanted to leave the area. And the Army came around and said, hey, we can stay in the Bay Area and I can stay in the reserves. So I ended up doing that route. That was the way I did it. I think it's still doable like that right now, but I think most people do the HPSP.
Great. So what was your payback? So you said it was a health professions loan. So how much payback did you owe the Army? And then how much of your loans did they pay for? And now you've been in it for 23 years. So I know it's definitely, the payback definitely wasn't 23 years.
So 1999 when I joined, and I got commissioned actually in 2000, December 2000 was my commission. And at that time, they would pick up, it was 1-for-1. So for every year of school loans that you wanted forgiven, then you would have to serve 1 year of reserve duty in what they call the active reserves. And you had to do another 2 years of individual reserve, which is something you're just on the list, but you're not necessarily having to drill. So it's about a total of 6 years of actual commitment. Yes, you're right. After 20 something years, they have forgiven my loans, but there was also a lot of other incentives to stay in. So they had retention bonuses and other incentives to try to keep you in the service.
Some of the reasons I'm assuming you decided to join the Army were your previous experience and knowledge with the military. You mentioned the ROTC. I'm assuming also the payback, the loan payback. Are there other reasons that made you decide you wanted to join the Army?
Yes, I had a couple of classmates in dental school that were going through the naval scholarship program. And I just really liked what they were doing in between semesters or during our summer breaks. They would go on their reserve duty and just the connections they were making. And I really wanted to be a little bit more outdoors and not be in a practice clinical setting kind of, that's all you're doing. So I wanted to try something a little bit more adventurous. So that was part of it. And I thought the military, because a lot of my old instructors and professors were all previous military. So they always had good things to say about it. It sounded like the camaraderie and the bonds that they made during service were still endearing. And I thought that was a good thing. So I got really attracted to those qualities about going into the military.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about your first year out of dental school in the military. So you worked in a base, and were you there full time? I want to know what the difference between the reserves and being active duty.
That's a really good question. So at least in the Army, and I can speak for the Army Dental Corps, most of the dentists in the dental corps are actually reserve dentists. And a lot of them are in private practice, and they'll spend some portion of their time training. And usually about 2 weeks out of the year, they're going to go to a mission of some sort. So when you first start out, you need to go to officer basic school. So I did that my first year, and that was in Fort Sam Houston, Texas. And you go in there to learn about the structure of the military and the leadership and all the acronyms that you can never want to know, and just basically how the Army as an organization works. And then you report to your unit, and my unit was happened to be located in the Bay Area, and it's a dental unit, a dental company, so it's made up of dentists and all the supporting personnel. So you get assigned to this unit, and then that unit in turn will start to come out with training and any missions that you have coming forward. So this was in 2000. So 2000, it's right before 9/11. So the world was a little different. Training was a little bit more, not as, I would say, strict, or it was a different culture. And in 9 months, it had changed over because of 9/11. Things became much more serious. And so requirements and getting training was a lot more emphasized so that you can be ready to go and fulfill a mission if you needed to.
So you worked there full time, or were you working at a private practice at that time as well?
Yeah, in the reserves, you're not a full-time dentist in the military. So I was in private practice. Yeah,
so
you'll train 1 weekend a month, and
1 weekend a month.
Yeah, 2 weeks out of the year, you're going to come together, and they call it annual training. And that annual training, you could do setting up your dental clinic, or you can actually go to a community and practice dentistry. So the reserves are different in that regards, is that we're not full-time. A lot of us are in private practice full-time. In the active duty, they would go to a base, they'd be assigned to a base and assigned to a dental clinic or a hospital, and that would be their full-time job. So they would do dentistry in the military full-time. So
Okay.
that's the difference there. But in terms of, doing military service, when you are reservist, you become active duty at that point in time. And you're expected to do all the same things that the active duty dentists will be performing in the same
Hmm.
facilities, except you don't do it on a full-time basis.
Okay. So did you also find an associateship job as a dentist right out of graduating from dental school? Or how was that? I'm assuming you had to balance your own work and then being a reserve
Yeah, actually,
dentist.
when I got out of school, I associate or I temp for a few places because I wanted to know where I wanted to practice. So that's kind of one of the more important things is what location you want to be at and to see if you like that area, that community. So I did
Hmm.
some temporary jobs in the Tri Valley or the Pleasanton area where I'm at now. And I was fortunate enough to come across a former Army periodontist, and he's taking out a young dentist for lunch, and we're talking, and he finds out I'm in the Army, and he refers me over to a couple of his colleagues that are probably in the window of retirement. And
Hmm.
the fact that I had a connection with him with the Army, he found two people that were previous military, and I was fortunate enough to have an associateship with both those dentists, and it kind of led me on to where I'm at now. So it's kind of a lucky break for me to meet someone that had almost the same background. He also went to UCSF and he was military as well. But that was kind of nice.
Yeah, that's neat that it opened doors.
It did, yeah, it certainly did, and I wasn't expecting it. And the periodontist that I had that kind of got me to like this area was he was an Army dentist, and he really was happy about talking to another military person, and to be in dental as well, as it's even smaller, so not too many
Hmm.
people that do the same job you do. You don't come across that often, so he was really helpful in getting me to the right places.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so tell us a little bit about when you started, when you bought your first practice, and how did that come to be? Did it
So as it
also? Mhm.
Yeah, so I was saying I was introduced to his name is Dr. Pridemore over here in Pleasanton. He'd been in practice here for about 30 years. He was also a UCSF graduate and an Air Force officer. And I met with him, and he just said, "Hey, why don't you just start practicing?" He was only in his office a few days a week, and he encouraged me to just start practicing a day and start seeing my own patients, and with the idea of just getting myself established so that when he's ready to transition out,
Mhm.
we would do a transition. So I did that for about 3 years, which was really helpful because I just got out of school. We had a young daughter. I was a I was a young officer in the Army, and 9/11 happened, and I was off on my first deployment in 2003. So it really was nice to be in a established practice and
Mhm.
kind of be semi-autonomous. And the
Mhm.
staff, I had the same staff, but they just happened to work for me for a day a week. And then I also associated for a dentist out in Walnut Creek who was also established. He was there for 30 something years, and that was a very stable practice. And I was lucky to kind of learn and not having all the responsibilities of a full-on dental practice, just doing it a little slower and learning how to manage the patients and how to deal with employees and all the things that they don't really teach you in dental school on how to run a practice. So I learned that hands-on for about 3 years before Dr. Pridemore finally decided he was going to retire, and I ended up buying his practice, which was a very nice transition because I've had 3 years of experience in the practice and have met a lot of the patients already. And I kept the staff, which was a real bonus. In fact, 2 out of those 3 staff members are still with me today. And it's been over 20 years. So
yeah, that says a lot.
I was very fortunate, and I learned how to practice the way he did, and just really not make a lot of, I would say, kind of rookie mistakes, because I had a more seasoned mentor that was kind of helping me along. And I thought that was a really, really good thing for my career, because a lot of my classmates that went, either started out their own practices or bought practices right away, and they had to devote full time. And with the military and a young family, it was really hard to balance trying to start a practice from the get-go. And I think for my situation, it just turned out really advantageous to do it this way.
It sounds like it did. In 2003, you said you went on your first deployment.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What happened to your practice when you went on your deployment? How long was your deployment? Did you have to hire an associate to work at your practice during this time?
Well, for the first deployment, no, because I was just starting out. I was practicing out of his office 1 day a week, and then I was an associate for another dentist the rest of the week. So I did not have to hire an associate to take over. So those patients they were going to the same building. And so Dr. Pridemore was seeing the patients that I needed to see. And it wasn't a lot. So that wasn't such a big deal. And taking a little bit of leave of absence from my other practice was also not a big deal, because that was a pretty mature practice, and the owner there was very supportive of what I was doing. So when I deployed, I became active duty. So that's what happens when you're a reservist and you deploy. You become an active duty member. And my first deployment was in Colorado, Colorado Springs in Fort Carson. And I was attached to an infantry division, and each division's like a large structure of soldiers in the Army, and you take care of them. So they had a dental clinic. So I was a staff dentist at one of the divisions. And so I did bread and butter dentistry for troops that were getting ready to deploy to, at that time, it was Iraq and Afghanistan. So my primary job was to make sure soldiers that were coming there for deployment were dentally healthy. So doing the checkups and making sure if they had any work that needed to be done, that they were, referred to the clinic and taken care of. So that was my job at Fort Carson, was really to get deploying soldiers ready. And I did that for 3 months. So when you deploy as a reservist, it's a 90-day deployment. So a lot of people think, well, ever since the Gulf War, when you go back in time, when we had the first Gulf War, they mobilized a lot of reservists for 1-year tours. And those 1-year tours were really very, difficult for a lot of private practice dentists. A lot of them could not afford to be out of their practices for a year. So they really lost a lot of recruitment because of that, because of the fear of having to be deployed for 1 year.
I see.
So Congress went ahead and amended a plan that said professionals, especially in the medical field, are only going to be required to be 90 days. And it's 90 days on the ground. So wherever they send you, as soon as you land there, the clock starts running for 90 days. But you may be out about 4 months because of training. And when you come back home, it's a couple weeks. So all in all, deployments take about 4 months out of your time. So 4 months is doable if you can find an associate, which I had to do on my second deployment. So my second deployment happened in 2008. And at that time, I was already well into my practice. At that time, I was practicing in Pleasanton now at full time.
The other dentist retired at that time.
Yeah, correct. And so I ended up having to hire an associate.
Okay.
And I was fortunate enough to find a new grad from Southern California that was interested in living in Northern California,
Pleasanton.
but yeah, but wasn't really convinced that maybe Northern California isn't for her. So she wanted to see how it's like. So it worked out because she really wanted to just be in the area for about 3 to 4 months and make a decision at that point. So I hired her on to keep the practice going while I was gone for those 4 months. And luckily I had the same staff, like I said. So
Mm-hmm.
the staff was the key because I had known a lot of those patients well before I was there. And a lot of my patients here were very supportive. So the absence wasn't that difficult for the practice per se. I was really lucky to find that associate that could take over while I was gone in that time I was gone for about almost 4 months and I was in Iraq. So that was my first overseas deployment. It was with the unit I was with, so it's a lot of people that I've known since 2000. So you get to, you have a good team. So you're away from home, but you're kind of with a new family that you have there. So you keep busy and the days kind of go quickly. So that was my second deployment. It was a little different.
Okay, now I have more questions. So on
Sure.
your second deployment in Iraq, were you also doing bread and butter dentistry just in Iraq? Or what type of dentistry were you doing there?
There's a lot of you're the general dentist in the area. So we were in charge of half the country, my unit was. So there was about 8 dentists, and we're in about 4, 5 different locations. And we're basically in charge of all Army and other assets in the area for mostly a lot of emergency stuff. When you deploy out, they do a complete medical and dental check for you to make sure that you're in good shape so that you don't have problems. So a lot of the people we get there, it was because, they had a broken tooth, or a lot of young people are there. They all of a sudden had pericornitis and that third molar needs to come out now and things like that. So you weren't doing a lot of preventive stuff. So you weren't doing prophies, or you weren't, replacing amalgams because they ain't like them or whatever it was. It was really more like emergency type of dentistry where you want to make sure you get them out of pain, get them stabilized, and then they can get the definitive care when they come back to the US. And so we rarely, in fact, I know we didn't do any crown and bridge work at all.
Okay.
So you would temporize it and they would wait until they get to the US to get it done. But you did a lot of endo. You opened things up, medicated it, get it at least stabilized. I did a lot of extractions, a lot of third molars that were blowing up, so you had to take care of them. So that was the kind of dentistry that you were doing out there, which in the demographics I'm in is not that, it's not something I do a lot of. So it was really a different type of practice for me, which was good because I was there with a lot of dentists that were very, very skilled at those procedures. So I really learned a lot about just basic dentistry. So that was a good thing.
Where did you sleep? What did you eat? Were you nervous going into it? How did you feel at this time?
Yes, it was during a time in the Iraq war that they called the surge, and it was in 2008, and it's when we were bringing in a lot. I think we had over 300,000 troops there. So there was this huge influx of troops to try to kind of calm down the whole area because it was getting really bad. And so I was very nervous about going there, but knowing that usually the medical assets are going to be in a very as secure of a place you can get it. I mean, our hospitals and our clinics are usually put in places that are as safe as they can be. But with Iraq being a different type of conflict where there's no defined places where the enemy's here or they're there, they're kind of just everywhere. And it was difficult because I didn't know exactly what to expect. And
Hmm.
knowing and seeing TV or watching the news wasn't really the best thing because you kind of get a false sense of what's going on there just based on the news reports. But the base itself was humongous. It was massive. It was about the size of the city I live in now. Had an airport. I was next to the headquarters. So we had, the accommodations were I was in a kind of a trailer. I had my own bathroom, which was a nice thing. But it's just really strange when you have blast, you have bunkers everywhere that you had to run to and sandbags everywhere. But we had a Starbucks. So
Wow.
that was a little bit of stuff to remind you of home. But
Hmm.
after you get there, you land, it's very surreal because you hear things that you don't normally hear back at home.
Uh-huh.
It looks completely foreign. It's a totally foreign country and everything looks different. But after a few weeks, you start to settle in and you start to do your work and becomes kind of everyday life, but just a little different setting. You'd hear things at night. The first few weeks, it's hard to sleep because you hear things and you worry and you go into the bunker and no one's there. And then you start to realize that it just people forget about that kind of, what's going on around them. We were
Hmm.
inside a base that was, again, like I said, relatively safe and all, it's pretty secure. But when you go there, it's still very scary because it's a war. There's a lot of things that can happen. You hear stories of people, and you just have to keep a really vigilant posture at all times. You're always looking at where you're at and what's going on at all times. And it makes you a little bit more hyper aware. And
Hmm.
it takes a little time to kind of get into the routine of things because you're so hyper aware about stuff. So dentistry becomes almost like a secondary thing because you're thinking about other stuff. But
Yeah.
you make it through, and when you get home and you come back to your practice and you have a bad day, you go,
Everything's
it's
easier.
it's 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 impossible to have a bad day in a practice in the United States. It's just impossible. So that was one of the neat things to kind of put in perspective when I'm having a difficult day at the office or whatever. It's not that hard. Nothing, nothing's
Uh-huh.
nothing is that bad. So it works out at the end.
That's really nice that you can put things into perspective because everything you just said sounds like a very scary time. Hearing you being able to overcome that and then finding the good in that experience is nice to hear.
I think as a practice owner, also, it forced me to really get my practice in a stable situation. I had to make sure I had some contingencies in place. A lot of
Hmm.
young dentists that come in, they're worried about just getting the practice going, but you have to have some of these things that people don't like to talk about, which is what happens if you're not going to come back, and you need to
Hmm.
have a contingency to sell your practice, or what are you going to do? Who's going to cover it? So I was forced to do that and get all these systems in place before I left, having a plan in place just in case, the worst happens. So you have that all worked out. A lot of dentists don't do that because it's just not in the mindset. Unfortunately, things happen in life, and sometimes I've known doctors that all of a sudden they're not unable to practice because of health issues or something else, and now
Hmm.
they're scrambling on what are they going to do next. What happens to the practice? It made me take care of all those things before I had to really do it on my own, and that really helped out just practicing going forward, especially with the pandemic just around the corner. A lot of practices almost just imploded because all of a sudden, they have to close down. Well, I've closed my practice numerous times for deployments, for all these things, and we know it always comes out. We know what
Hmm.
to expect. My patients know what to expect. So the pandemic for our practice really wasn't a big of a disruption as a lot of people may have had to go through because of what my experiences were. So I think that was really a blessing that I had to do some of these things early on in my career. And nobody expects to have a pandemic. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
Closing up for 2 years. And we rolled with it and just kind of, it didn't affect my practice as much as I thought it would have. That was really a nice surprise,
That's good. Well, and like you said, there's worse things.
Absolutely. So a lot of things I've learned in the military is always, it's just, you got to figure out things on the go. And that's the one thing I really like, taking out of my military experience is that you have to problem solve at all stages, and everything is planned like you think it's going to go, and it never goes the way you think it's going to go. And knowing that and being able to react to that and not panic about things is really one good set of skills that I think I've really developed from being in the military. It's just we figure it out, whatever it comes out, we always find a solution to it. And we're not surprised that something comes your way that doesn't always work out. So that's a really nice thing to take out.
We'll segue a little bit out from the military topic and then back in. You mentioned when you went on your deployment, you hired an associate from Southern California, straight out of dental school. To me, that sounds a little scary. How did you trust this person? Do you ask certain questions? What were you looking for in an associate, especially for someone right out of dental school? That sounds like you took a leap on someone.
I did. I think about it. Yeah, I think it was a desperate time.
Okay.
I was leaving. So desperate times sometimes call for desperate measures. But I like to meet the people that I'm going to be working with, hopefully face to face. And at that time and place, I think she communicated very well. She had enough confidence to show me that she can do the job, but at the same time didn't have, she wasn't so overconfident that she might get herself in a pickle if she thought she can, tackle everything and anything. And she was very honest about what she was comfortable with and what she wasn't. And I knew what she was capable of treating. So between her and the Dr. Pridemore, who was still practicing there full time.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, this is in 08 when I hired her. I also belonged to a study club. So I belonged to a dental study group in the Tri-Valley here. And they've been around since Dr. Pridemore was in it. He started it 30 years ago. So it's a collection of general practice specialists that meet, we meet once a month and we talk about dentistry or not talk about dentistry, but it's just a support group. So every one of those dentists were there to help me out while I was gone. So if I needed anybody to take a case that my associate was not comfortable doing, there was plenty of seasoned doctors that were there to really help out. So it wasn't that critical to have a associate that can take care of every single thing. I mean, she could take care of a majority of the procedures that were going to come in. It was maintenance. A lot of it was maintaining the practice, getting, routine stuff done. And if bigger, more complex treatments were in need, a lot of patients were okay to wait until I came back, because a lot of it wasn't an emergency. They can be done in the next few months, or it can be put off for a few months. So that wasn't such a big deal. But some of the things I looked for was just somebody that was confident enough to do the basics, but not too overconfident to get themselves in trouble. And she kind of fit the bill perfect. She ended up practicing. She liked the area. She practices in Walnut Creek at the old practice I was at, because I referred her over because I thought she did such a good job. And And the other dentist I worked for over there was looking for another person, and she loved it. She's still there to this day. So sometimes you just get lucky. That was a situation with her.
Nice.
On my recent, I got to tell your audience, but I just came back from a deployment a year ago. So I was in
Okay.
Kuwait, and I hired another associate based on the things I learned back in 2008. I found another person that was checking out the area, and the staff was still the same. So it really, the second time around, or this previous deployment I was in, was so smooth. I mean, it just,
You're used to it.
yes. And my patients were used to it. So that's another thing, is they know what my background is, that I am in the Army still. And
Mhm.
they were very, like, just didn't bother them a whole lot. And they had a lot of confidence that they were going to be taken care of. And so it worked out very nicely to have that prior experience, so that going forward, it wasn't going to be anything different. That will be my last deployment, by the way, because I think I'm going to be finishing up here. So
Yeah. So
I
you've
don't
been
have to
on
worry
3
about
so
that.
far.
Yes.
3 so far,
3.
and 2 of them are overseas.
Yeah. They were all different. And I
Mhm.
think it was nice to kind of have them all in different stages of my career.
Mhm.
And, again, that was just some good timing. Some people will get like a back-to-back, they'll go on deployment, and then 2 years later, they'll go on another one. And it just seems maybe a little too much, because it does take some time for you to come back and get back to the way things were prior to deploying. And what I mean by that is getting your production back to where it was, taking care of a lot of your personal life, getting it back to normal. It's a commitment. It affects a lot of aspects of your life, not just your practice. And it takes time for that to kind of get back to normal, or get back to a sense of normalcy, because it's not going to be the same as you were when you came back, or before you left. So
Sure.
everything changes just a little bit, and it takes a little bit of time for you to get back to where you were. So the timing was pretty good for me.
What was the scariest experience you've had? And then also, what has been the best experience you've had?
Okay. So probably the more frightening one was when I was in Iraq, and because it was an active war zone, and we were there to not only support our troops and take care of our needs there, but we were also there to kind of help out the Iraqis, and try to train them, and give them resources so that they can provide care for their patients and their people. So
Mhm.
one of the missions I had was to bring in dentists from one of the universities in Baghdad. There was a dental school there that unfortunately was not non-operational, but they were trying to get it back to working conditions. So we were tasked to go assist them. So that means leaving the base. So
Mhm.
when you leave the base, it's like leaving the fortress, and all of a sudden your sense of safety starts to become less and less certain how safe the
Mhm.
place is. So you leave the base, and now all of a sudden you've got your weapon, and they tell you to load it and have it ready.
Uh-huh.
And you're driving in the streets, and there's people, and you're just worried about every single thing, because you're outside the wire, and that's where a lot of things happen. So that was frightening. Um, we got the dentist that we are supposed to bring back. There was 4 of them, and when you see them, they live, they're living as normal as they can be, and they live outside that fortress, and they seem to take it on like it was just a normal day for them. And you're sweating, and your mouth is dry because you're worried about everything. And when you get back to the base, you're just relieved that you're
Mhm.
you know you're back in your base. So nothing happened, but just being outside, and not knowing what was going to happen, and all the things you see on the news and movies and all that starts to make you think twice. So that was really probably the most frightening thing I've had to deal with. In hindsight, it was probably pretty safe, but at that time you just don't know, and you're really worried, and you've got the smallest gun in the whole unit, and you're like, I'm not going to do anything with this. So
Yeah.
that was the most frightening. But one of the more one of the best things that's happened for me in the military is, besides meeting a lot of new people and seeing some places that you'll probably never see in your life. Last year I had the pleasure of commissioning my daughter, who graduated from the Air Force Academy. And I got to give her oath of office, because another officer has to administer the oath of office. So
Hmm.
that was probably the best thing in my military career, is to be able
That's
to,
awesome.
yeah, be able to give her oath of office and give her a salute. And that was probably the best. I'll definitely put that as the most memorable. But there's a lot of little things in there too that give you a lot of joy and pleasure, and a lot of it is just the people you meet and the people you get to work with, and you'll make lifelong friends with that. And I really like that whole camaraderie part of the military. So
Hmm.
I think that's the stuff that some people are lucky enough to maybe find a good group of other soldiers that you'll bond with, and you'll continue to be friends with them pretty much, hopefully, the rest of your career. It has been a good thing in that aspect.
So you said this is going to be your last deployment. Does that mean you're thinking of retiring soon?
Yeah, I think this is my 23rd year. The military's changing a lot. We're no longer in conflicts, which is good. Training now is focusing on other, like, more mundane things. And I'm just feeling that I think I've gotten all the things I wanted. I've accomplished a lot of the things I wanted to do. And a lot of the people that I've served with are retired, or they're no longer there. And I think my time is almost there. I do enjoy just being out, because if it wasn't for the military, I don't think I'd be as fit as I am today. And knowing dentistry, is a lot of people may not feel that it's physically demanding, but it's physically demanding. And I think being in the military has had to force me to be in better, take care of myself a little bit better physically. So I do enjoy the physicality of being in the military, but unfortunately, it starts to wear on some of your body parts. You start to feel it. And I think that's probably one of the more pressing factors about maybe calling it a career, is just, I don't want to get hurt, doing some of the military things,
Hmm.
because they do require you to physically be active and lifting things and stuff like that, which, if I want to practice dentistry a lot longer, then I need to really mitigate some of those risks a little bit better. And I think that's probably on the horizon, is putting the military career at an end.
Yeah. So how does that work? I believe you can retire within the military and be part of a pension plan if you've been in it for 20 years. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I got my 20-year letter, which is kind of like you're good. And
That's exciting.
yes,
Congratulations.
that's exciting. It's like you get out of jail card, but it just, yeah, you get a pension, a retirement, a modest retirement, which is, for a reservist, it's going to be less than an active duty full-time soldier, but it's still something. It's a nice perk. But
Hmm.
I think the bigger perk is having health care pretty much for the rest of my
Forever?
life. Yeah,
Okay.
because part of that is being deployed in a war zone, is another perk for doing those things.
Hmm.
So, they if it's going to be fine. I think you won't be able to draw retirement until, I believe, you're 60. I still got a few years before I can start drawing retirement, but I can not actively serve anymore and just wait till 60 comes around. But the medical part of it is going to be covered, which is nice. It's not a lot, but it's a modest amount, and it's just a thing to maybe help you out in later in life with the medical.
Yeah, that's a great perk. So if someone wanted to go the same route that you went and be a reserve dentist in the Army, they would be signing up for these mission trips, for these trips. So they would be getting deployed. There's no doubt about it. That's part of the plan.
Well, let's maybe we have to distinguish between two things. Every year you're going to go on an annual training, which is 2 weeks. And it could be in the United States or it could be overseas, but they're training exercises. Deployment is a different category. That's usually it's involuntary. That means your unit becomes activated. So instead of a reserve unit, it becomes now an active duty unit, and it's going to go fulfill a mission that they have. So deployments typically only occur during times of war or some other conflicts. So going forward, deployments are less likely because we're not currently in a active like war footing, but you never know. Things going on in Ukraine. There's a lot of tensions going on there. So you're always at that possibility of deploying, and you're going to be training like you're going to deploy. So every year your unit's going to do an exercise somewhere that's going to mimic being on deployment for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And that's when everybody has to show up for that 2-week time.
Out of the year, you said?
Yeah, out of the year. So
that seems like such a little time.
It does.
For the benefits you get, like 2 years, 2 weeks out of the entire year, you're considered reserve. But then when I hear that, I'm like, what's the downside? And I guess the biggest downside would be that you might get deployed.
That's correct. So that's exactly right. And some prior to 9/11, like my commander, when I first came in, he never deployed, and he was a 20-year officer. It just the luck or unlucky, circumstances. A year, 9 months later, the world changed. And this guy that I was talking to, who hadn't deployed for 20 years, in 2 years' time, I'm deploying. So I think going forward, the likelihood of deployments are going to be less. And so their selection now and their criteria for joining the dental corps, I think, is going to get tougher, because I think you're going to see an influx of people choosing the military route because of having to deploy are going to be a lot less. So I think you're going to start seeing a lot more people coming into the military, especially with, in light of what costs are with dental school now. As you know, I'm a big proponent of doing the military route, because I think it's a great way to get your school paid for, and also get a lot of valuable experience and connections that you probably will be able to get anywhere else. I think in the next few years, it's going to get really popular. In fact, I'm seeing more and more people considering it.
Good to know. So we're going to start wrapping it up now. So I was going to ask you what your future plans are. So one of your future plans is to retire from the military, and you plan to practice dentistry full-time at your 2 practices. How do you balance your time between both of your practices? And then do you have any other plans for the future?
It's transitional things. And I think practice of dentistry, that's why they call it the practice of dentistry, is because you're always learning how to do it better. And things are coming up, new technologies are coming up, as you know, and trying to stay abreast of everything is sometimes a little daunting. So I think I'm going to plan on becoming more efficient in some of the digital innovations that are going on in dentistry now. I would like to, a couple of my colleagues in the Army, are also teaching at a new dental school over here in
Mhm.
Sacramento. They're faculty members, and they're always actively trying to recruit people they know. So they've always been asking me if I want to come and teach a day or two or something. And that's something I'm interested in. I think I would like to do that at some point in my career, is to go and teach, probably the clinical side of things. I have plenty of things to replace the military
Mhm.
commitments. Hopefully, one of my kids may be interested in joining the profession. So it would behoove me to maybe stick around a little bit and see if one of them pans out, and I might be able to have that opportunity to practice with one of them for a little bit
Mhm.
before I can, maybe call it a career in dentistry as well. But I think I still have a lot to look forward to in dentistry, particularly now with a lot of changes going on. It's exciting for me to transition. I know I'm going to miss doing military things because I like all of the things I told you I enjoy. I really do like those things. A lot of my colleagues will go overseas and do these mission trips, and they pay for it themselves because it's part of one of the, like, some organizations they belong to. And
Mhm.
I'm getting paid to go do these things in some really crazy locations. So I probably will still try to do that. I know I wanted to plan a trip back to the Philippines, and where my parents are from, and see if I can. They do have a dental clinic there that we can help out with, and I wanted to do something like that. So in the short term, I think that's in the horizon, is to go back and do a mission there. I would love to
Mhm.
have you join us too, Erica, by the way. So
That would be so fun. I would love to come. That's
yeah, so
exciting.
I've been planning or having this in the back of my mind for the last few years. And now that I have some younger relatives and acquaintances that are just starting their careers, I think this would be a wonderful opportunity for them to be able to do some things. And also, if I can, maybe have one of my kids get inspired about maybe becoming a dentist by doing one of these
Mhm.
trips, it would be a good thing. So
Yeah, that's a great
keep
idea.
an eye.
Let's do that.
I got it in my bag of things to do in the next few years. So I hope we can get that going, and hopefully we can have you come join us.
Yeah, I would love to. Any final advice that you would like to leave viewers with?
In light of the cost of dentistry today, just, I'm hearing of graduates just coming out of undergrad and then dental school before they even go into practice, and the amount of debt load they have, it almost seems insurmountable with the amount of debt that they're taking on. And I think
Mhm.
with that sort of pressure, it really will curtail some of the opportunities that a lot of these younger dentists are going to want to pursue, because they have a big financial commitment they have to service. I think the military offers you quite a lot more freedom when you do decide to go into private practice. So you don't have to do a career like I did, 20 something years. The HPSP, you go dental school 4 years, you go to active duty 4 years, and then you go to the reserve in two. Those 4 years of active duty are going to fly. They're going to be so
Mhm.
fast, and you're going to meet a lot of people like yourself in the same situation all over the country. And it gives you a network of people that you're going to be able to go tap at some point in your career for whatever reason. And you're going to come out of school, and you're going to be as confident as anybody else in your peer group, and you're not going to be saddled with a humongous debt load. It's not that bad of a deal. I think it's going to get better. And if you can tolerate it, I think you should give it at least a look, see if that's something you might want to do. But I think for the right person, it might be a good deal.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this video podcast with me. I'm sure anyone that was a little bit interested in the military is going to appreciate this video a lot.
Oh, I hope so. And if somebody wants to ask me questions offline, or you know anyone that wants to get in touch with me about anything, feel free to get them my info if they need to